Hello, hello! When the FDA rejects a drug, the market screams, "Sell right now!" But sometimes they are not entirely right. Today we are going to see how these events can actually become real opportunities. Sharpen your teeth because we are driving into the wall of FDA CRLs, complete response letters. Welcome to Taxi Biotech, a show to keep up with the latest news and updates from the world of biotechnology and to learn about its impact on the stock market. The stock data I present here is just a reflection of how companies or their clinical trials are progressing and does not constitute any investment recommendation. This is purely for entertainment. Let's get started. First, what exactly is a CRL? A complete response letter is a document the FDA sends to companies that have applied to market a new drug. It lists the deficiencies that must be addressed before approval can be granted. In other words, it's not an approval. It explains why the drug wasn't approved and what needs to be fixed. This process can go through several rounds. The company can submit its application, the FDA issues a CRL, the company then fixes the problems and resubmits, the FDA might issue another CRL, and so on, sometimes even with a third round. As always, I'll leave all the links, charts, and reference down in the comments. Now, when the FDA rejects a drug at first, I don't know if they are the algorithms or retail investors panic selling, but the stock usually drops, and drops a lot. That's where a specific group of biotech investors come in. Those who look for clues to figure out whether the company can respond and resubmit the application. If the company does respond and resubmit, the stock often sees a significant rebound. And if the FDA later sets a new review date, that's usually another bullish moment. Obviously, if the drug eventually gets approved, the rebound can be much stronger. In this video, we are going to focus on the speculation phase, here, before any final approval or rejection occurs. Let's look at a few examples. But before that, we have to do a few clarifications. These denials of a new drug applications can happen for many reasons, and this is where the key lies. If the FDA requires a new clinical trial because the efficacy wasn't sufficient or the controls were not adequate, that's one of the worst case scenarios, since it means more time and a lot of money before another resubmission. And if that drug happens to be one of the company's only asset in its pipeline, they are likely flat for a long time, and we don't want that. However, sometimes the rejections are for much simpler reasons, like clarifications in the manufacturing process, missing certification, labeling updates, or additional statistical analysis. Obviously, if we are talking about a big company with a diversified portfolio, it's not going to drop 80%. It will fall, but not as nearly as much. But if we are talking about a small biotech like this, that only needs to clarify some clinical data, that's where the opportunity might appear. Still, you need to study it carefully and not jump in without net. Because doing that is exactly what most investors do when that press release hits saying the FDA has issued a CRL here. Let's look at the case of Replimune, a company that in July just received a CRL for its melanoma treatment. In this case, there was a person inside the FDA who had been very critical on these kind of trial designs. We actually covered that story here on the channel before. Later, this person left the agency and the stock rebounded a little bit. Now, we are not here to discuss whether the drug works or not, whether it's better than the competition or not, or any of that clinical science. That's the kind of deep dive that we usually do when waiting for a PDUFA event, which we've analyzed many times on this channel. But here, today, the only thing we're trying to figure out is whether the company will respond to the FDA. In Replimune's case, they say they would request a meeting with the FDA within 30 days. And by September 2nd, they announced that the meeting had already been scheduled. Before the results of that meeting were given, the stock had already gained 160%. And then, of course, it dropped again. You know the saying, buy the rumor, sell in the news, because in this date they update the following meeting with the FDA, but they didn't say anything. There was no real news until October, when the FDA granted a new review date for April 2026. So, the lesson here is pretty clear, right? If there is a CRL that the company can respond, meaning the FDA isn't asking for a new trial and the issues can be resolved with data or clarification, investors will usually take that as a positive signal. But if there is no hope or no plan to fix the deficiencies, the stock will collapse. We are not trying to predict whether the drug will eventually get approved or not. We just want to know whether investor sentiment will turn positive again. And after a drop of 82%, even a small sign of progress can make a big difference. Let's move to another example. Atara Bio. They received a CRL stating that the only issue was a manufacturing inspection. The FDA didn't request new clinical studies and found no efficacy deficiencies. Even so, the stock dropped 55% over the following days. But later, after some volatility, it recovered to complete response letter levels around here. Next example, at Aldeyra Therapeutics. They got a CRL as well, but announced they plan to resubmit their application by mid-2025. That's exactly what happened, and the stock went from minus 74% on CRL day to recovering completely, gaining around 300% in total. And finally, the last example, Milestone Pharma. They received a CRL too. No clinical deficiencies, just a request for additional manufacturing controls. The company stated it would respond to the FDA, and it did. On June 16th, Milestone submitted its response, and a month later, the FDA gave them a new review date. Everything seems perfect, right? Well, not quite. You know how biotech can surprise you. Just when everything looked good, on the same day the FDA granted the new review date, Milestone announced a stock offering at $1.50 per share, almost half of its market price that day. The result? It was not a surprise, a minus 40% drop that day. So you can see here a 60% drop after CRL, recovering and doing a stock offering in the half price of the stock price that day, went down 45%. So now we have a powerful new tool to study this setup, because the FDA has made all the CRL publics on its website here, okay? You know, links in the comments. You can download them all and analyze the deficiency list here in this PDF format, okay? So you can analyze the deficiency in each case to see how they correlate with the company's stock performance and starting finding patterns. It's not something quick or easy, but hey, a 300% gain make it worth the effort, doesn't it? So, to sum it up, when learning to spot patterns, if the FDA requests another clinical trial or issues strong negative comments, that's bad news. It means time, money, and uncertainty. But if the company can respond quickly, if they control their manufacturing process, or if the therapy is important enough to secure a meeting with the FDA, those are generally positive signs. Still, never forget, in biotech, cash is king. A company can always surprise you with a sudden stock offering. And as we've seen, sometimes the rumor is what you buy and the news is what you sell. Apply your own strategy. This isn't financial advice, just insights from the world of biotech investing. If you enjoy it, you know what to do. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Bye.